So first, I'm just going to give you my position on abortion, and then we'll get to the counterpoint that Shapiro often likes to make. So a few things that I do not subscribe to. Firstly, just from a legal standpoint, I reject the idea that for any religious reasons we should be legislating abortion. If you are going to enact policy concerning abortion, then you should be able to make arguments that stand on their own 2 feet and are appealing to secular ears. I also do not subscribe to the potentiality argument. I don't believe that something has intrinsic value simply because of what it will become. There is a distinction that needs to be made between something that has potential value and something that has actual value. So a grown adult has certain attributes that give it actual value, intrinsic value. And to be human means to have those attributes. If a thing does not have those attributes, then it is not a person carrying with it intrinsic value. So my position on the unborn is pretty straightforward. If a fetus has value, then it is because it carries with it the qualifying attributes for intrinsic value. If a fetus does not have intrinsic value, then it is because it does not have those qualifying attributes. So for a thing to have the kind of value that we are talking about, the kind of value that has all kinds of moral implications, the kind of value that only humans have, and the kind of value that is worth protecting at nearly any cost, then that thing has to qualify. Not potentially, not hypothetically, but actually now. I also believe that abortion is one of the few issues where there's just two extreme ends and there's not really any position to be taken in the middle. It occupies one of those smaller spaces in philosophy where one conclusion has dramatically different implications than the other conclusion. If you conclude that a fetus, in one stage of development or another, is a person carrying with it all of the value that any other person has, then it necessarily follows that the abortion of that human would be nothing less than murder. Just plain murder. And all other counter-arguments would just fall flat on their face. The slogans, the witty one-liners, the "it's a woman's choice, it's a woman's body," and whatever else, they just become disgusting distractions from the fact that killing this human would be absolutely nothing less than heinously murdering an innocent person. However, if you conclude that this thing is not a person, not an individual, then aborting it carries no moral implication. And abortion should be thought of as nothing more than another procedure. And there'd be no reason for there to be any shame there, none at all. So yeah, it's either murder of the most innocent person or nothing at all. There's not really any in between there. So, Ben Shapiro. If you've ever heard Shapiro discuss abortion, then you've heard this argument before because he uses it quite frequently. And so here's a few examples of that.
So the real question is, where do you draw the line? So you're going to draw the line at the heartbeat? Because it's very hard to draw the line at the heartbeat. There are people who are adults who are alive because of a pacemaker. They need some sort of outside force generating their heartbeat. Okay, are you going to do it based on brain function? Okay, well, what about people who are in a coma? Should we just kill them? So the example that I've used is there are a lot of elderly people who are simply not viable, right? They're on machines. They are being kept alive by those machines. Could you remove those people from machines if 2 weeks from now they're going to recover? The answer would be no, right? I mean, it doesn't make their life worth any less, the fact that they're non-viable at this point. Beyond that, the question is, what level of consciousness do you feel is necessary in order to preserve a human life? I think consciousness is kind of a bad argument because, as I've said before, there are times when you are temporarily unconscious, right? I mean, like you are unconscious when you are asleep. This does not deride your value of life.
I think there's two things that make life valuable. I think consciousness, the ability to experience pain, senses and stuff like that, and personal identity. In particular, psychological continuity identity. So the fact that we have memories, we have relationships, people have relationships to us. I think those are
Do you need both of those, or is it either or? I just want to clarify your position.
Either or.
Okay, so if it's either or, then people with Alzheimer's have real continuity problems. You can't kill them. Okay, so if you can only live on life support, you're not a person. You stop being a person. So if you get in a car crash today and put you on life support, you're on an iron lung. You take off the iron lung, you're going to die. You're not a person anymore. Is that how this works?
Now, obviously, this isn't Shapiro's argument. You hear this argument a lot. And it comes out in a number of ways, but the basic formula looks like this. You give the hook by establishing the presupposition that we all hold to, which is that grown adults do have intrinsic value. For whatever reason, adults do have value. And then you ask, now why don't you think that a fetus is a human? Or why don't you think that a fetus has value? Or even, when do you think that a fetus has value? And what you're kind of trying to do here, what you're trying to lead into, is pin the value of the fetus to the adult, knowing that they can't separate the two. And then when the pro-choice guy tries to give some qualifying attribute, maybe consciousness, you take some absurd edge case in adults and you force them to concede that even in situations where adults don't have that attribute, we still consider them to have intrinsic value. And you continue to do this until you've procedurally, one by one, removed each and every attribute that the person might provide. And really, this is a highly effective argument. It's pretty grounded too. To repackage it, it's really just, if you believe that one thing has value and you can't provide any meaningful difference between that thing and another thing, then you should just go ahead and assume that the other thing has value too. And that holds up. The issue is that it only works as long as you can safely assume that the person holds to the premise that adults have intrinsic value. And this is almost always a safe assumption to make, especially in the settings that Shapiro likes to deploy this argument. A short exchange with a college student in front of a large crowd where he's just terribly unlikely to reject the premise that adults have intrinsic value. And we've seen students come close to making this suggestion, but Ben does a really good job of setting them up to look ridiculous if they were to take that idea across the finish line. And so, although I do think it's an effective argument, I think that it's a little bit cheeky, a little bit unfair, and it kind of takes advantage of the situation in which the argument is deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the argument around and say that if you want to pin the value of the fetus to the value of the adult, then I'm going to ask what makes adults so great? What properties do adults have that give them intrinsic value, and do fetuses have those properties as well? If you want to pin the value of a fetus to the value of an adult, then you have to provide those attributes that are great making in adults and say that they are carried by a fetus as well. And I mean, I think that this is fair. If you're going to work the problem backwards, if you're going to assert that a fetus has value because an adult has value, then you need to be able to say where the adult derives its value from. And this is something that a lot of people would actually struggle with. I mean, if you put religion aside for a moment, most people would have a hard time just on purely philosophical grounds explaining where humans derive their value, right? And so Shapiro is taking advantage of the fact that most people would struggle there. So it's just a premise that he assumes. But you can turn this around, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to turn this argument around on him to make him be the one to go searching for the variables. And what do I mean by that? Well, just imagine for a moment that every person has some set of attributes, let's say X, Y, and Z, and those attributes give them value. And we don't have to agree on what those attributes are, and maybe the set of attributes is flexible. You know, maybe a person can have certain attributes drop in and out of the set of variables that give them value. For example, when a person slips into a coma and they lose consciousness, they don't just immediately lose all value, even if we would consider consciousness to be one of the great making attributes. And I do think you've got a fake consciousness somewhere in there. But whatever those attributes are, whatever you think they are, you've got to be able to give an answer to the question, does a fetus have those attributes as well? And I think that the answer is no. No, it does not, at least not during certain stages of development. And I don't pretend to have all the answers. I believe that there's some gray area that I don't have an answer to, but there are some bits that I feel quite confident about. For example, I do believe that consciousness plays a huge part in all of this. I feel pretty strongly that what makes a person, what makes someone an individual, is in at least some part their psyche. I struggle to see how you could be a person without a brain. And maybe you're thinking, well, yes, but it will have a brain. And that's an argument to take. Like I said, I'm not going there right now. I will say that I think that this argument is absurd. And I do think that most people, unknowingly or not, actually think it's an absurd argument as well. This is why virtually every pro-lifer takes to pictures, graphs, and charts to try and point out how human-like the fetus that may be aborted already is, rather than trying to take some philosophical position on potential value in its relationship to actual value. I'm just saying that even to a pro-lifer, it really comes down to what they can demonstrate that a fetus has already accomplished, and that the graphic images that they often use to make their arguments are a testament to that. And so I've sort of drawn my line there at a brain, at consciousness, and maybe the line needs to be pushed out further, but I can't rightly say that a thing without a brain is a person with intrinsic value. It just doesn't hold up to me. It's not something that I can defend. But wherever the line is, whatever the set of great making properties is, if you were going to dive into the politics of abortion, if you were going to make weighty claims about what a woman can or cannot do with abortion, then you've got to have a position on this as well. You've got to be able to answer why a fetus should have the same status as an adult. You've got to at least assert that a human has some set of attributes that give it value that a fetus at least shares some part with. Because if people derive their value from all of these great things that make us human, consciousness, understanding, pain, our experiences, our ability to interact with the outside world, if these things make us great, well then it follows that something that doesn't have these things isn't great, at least not in the sense that we're talking about. And the reason that I've spent so much time mulling over this is because I want an answer to this. It really sort of feels like there's something unresolved here, like maybe I'm missing something. But most importantly, if I'm wrong about this, if I'm wrong about abortion at even the earliest stages of a fetus's development, that is absolutely terrifying to me. It's a question that matters infinitely. So if Ben has an answer to this, which I'm sure he's at least thought about this, then I'd like to know what the answer is, because the implications one way or another are terribly important. So if I was to be in line to ask Ben Shapiro this question, and I had to do it in just a few words, I'd put it to him like this. You've got a line on abortion that you often like to give, and I've thought a lot about it, and I'd like to sort of reframe the question on abortion that you often get. Could I maybe flip the question around on you and ask, what attributes do you think that an adult has that gives him intrinsic value, and how do you think that a fetus at, say, conception has those attributes? And if it doesn't have those attributes, where does it get its value? Now I imagine that he'd give one of a number of responses. He might take a religious angle, or he might argue for the potential value of the fetus. And then that might spin off into more of a meta discussion about the relationship between potential value and actual value. But I'd really like to know if he's got some kind of response that's outside of one of those two answers. And to be honest, maybe I just need to revisit the potentiality argument. But I mean, I feel pretty confident that there's nothing there. And so yeah, I mean, I'm just itching to know what he'd have to say about the value of an adult and how all of that works. Is Shapiro a moral realist, a moral constructivist? I'm not sure. It is a question that has been plaguing my mind. And obviously it extends well beyond Shapiro, but he is the one that keeps bringing it back to the front of my mind. And he's also just a household name, so maybe he gives someone viewing this something to identify with. If you made it this far, let me know what you think. What are your thoughts on all of this? Am I just completely off? Did I make any sense at all? Was the execution just really poor? Leave a comment below and I will get back to you.